Good morning. Here we are again on the ceremonial chairs in Africa, the bottom of Africa, and sending greetings to you in these times. I'd like to talk today about the wounded heart, and it is much more complicated than we know and we think, and it is at the basis of many, many troubles that are public, private, personal, national and international. It is fairly common for everyone, virtually everyone I would have thought, to have a wound, to have a heart wound when they're small, when they're teenaged, when we are growing, when we are adults. We get a clop, we get a hurt, and it is not the fact that we are hurt, it is what we do with it. That is the difference that makes the difference. Now, can I say that wounded hearts create illness? That is fairly certain. That is the first thing, and that is certain. If your heart is wounded, it is going to be living in a world and being in a world against its own volition and against its own purpose. Hearts are meant to be loving. They're supposed to give out love. They are supposed to give out kindness. That is what they do. But things go wrong. Now, if you are aware that you've had a wound in your life, and many people are aware at certain times that they have a wound, it may show itself in many ways. And what happens is that in the first instance, the heart is wounded, and it doesn't say very much, but it sits there with its wound. And you know that your heart is wounded when certain behaviours, I nearly said kick in, which is a common parlance, isn't it? We don't want them to kick in, but when certain behaviours arrive, we know that the wounded heart is in operation. And those behaviours are, first of all, defence structures. The heart says, ugh, I'm wounded. Okay, when I go out in the morning, I am going to put up my defences. You know, we women put our makeup on that we keep in a jar by the door, and we put our clothes on and we make a defence before we go into the world, depending on where you're going. At the moment, we don't work in our offices and in our schools and our universities. We have to work in a different way, and in a way that way is more intimate. This one-to-one camera work is intimate, but the difficulties come to the wounded heart publicly and privately. Now, publicly, I can't speak this morning, publicly, the wounded heart defences are very well known, and they are a sort of catch-22. Once they start, they go round and round. We all have met the face of somebody who doesn't want to do something, somebody who's aggressive, somebody who's passively aggressive, somebody who is just downright difficult, somebody who is willfully obstructive, somebody who is awkward, somebody who is in a temper tantrum, somebody who is withdrawn, somebody who is constantly cynical. I nearly said cheeky. Cheekiness can be one too, but I think that we'll start with the last one. Now, the cynic, I don't want to take all of these masks, they're just masks, but they are masking the wounded heart. The cynic is one of my least favourite, and if I have a client who is very cynical, the first thing I want to say is, oh, I don't understand why you've come to me. Because if you're cynical, it's not easy to accept things about yourself and accept things about this work, which is energy work, and it is about love. And, you know, the thing that is very, very tricky about all these structures, these defence structures, the tricky thing about them is that A, somebody is letting us get away with them when we display this behaviour. If you're someone who is very moody, or you have temper tantrums, or dramatic outbursts all the time, then whoever is with you must be allowing that. Now, I'm not talking about real rages, because that's a big work and that's a big issue to deal with, and people do go to anger management. I'm talking first of all about the start of these layers that come across the heart that give you a defence against the world. What are you doing? What's up over there? What's this going on? And you see the face. I don't want to do a brutal face, but you, I'm sure, live sometimes, hopefully not, but you live and work with people who are defensive. Now, the cynic is particularly difficult for me because the cynic comes often with very clever people. And a friend of mine, Sunel Brewer, who is an author, and she's an author in this village, writing in English and Afrikaans. She says in her latest book, it is very difficult for the clever to forgive. I think they are massively powerful words, and what happens there is that the intellect marries with the bossy old mind and the ego. Because of course in all of these defence structures there is a wonderful, wonderful ego. And we're only just coming to realise what the ego is. And the ego, of course, is personal, private, public, national and international. Countries have egos, parliaments have egos, companies have egos. I don't know about countries having egos. Countries have an identity and countries have a way of being, but I'm not so sure they have an ego. But in the difficulty with the cynic, which is a big veneer, it's a big mask and a big veneer, the cynic has to demote everything. He or she has to put everything down. And that comes from the intellect. It comes from the form of the intellect. It's thinking only in the head and not thinking in the heart. And the heart is a thinking organ. If I might just say, the late Christian Barnard, who you know came from here, was a South African man of great brilliance. He used to say that the heart was a thinking organ, and he should jolly well have known. And he was a lovely man, a charming man, a brilliant man, and I'm not sure whether it was, I'm not sure whether he started the research, but there is research to say from Addenbrooke's, I think, in Cambridge, that when people have new hearts, you know, always often usually in tragic circumstances when they have a heart from another person who's died, they very often take on the emotional structure of that person. Now, this is not the place to start talking about that research, but isn't that interesting? And I'm sorry again, but there is an old prayer, it's called the Old Sarum, 11th century Old Sarum near to Salisbury, and it says, God be in my heart and in my thinking. The prayer starts, God be in my head and in my understanding. God be, then some more words, then God be in my heart and in my thinking. So okay, let's have the heart as a thinking organ, and here we are with a wounded heart. So back to our cynic. The cynic doesn't smile very much for me. For me, he or she is quite a cheesy character, because cynicism is very hard and very wearing, very tiring for people. And the worst of it for me is found in mockery. Okay, if you don't want to do something, don't do it. But please don't go about shouting about it and being negative about it. And of course, our world is very often like this. Our Western world is very often cynical. It dresses the cynic up in very, very beautiful clothes. And I was talking to someone the other day who was just becoming famous and said to me, I am scared of what might be done to me, because it is said that we, beef up our personalities and then we knock them down. And of course, under the knocking down, through the cynicism, is spite. There is spite there. I would love someone to say publicly, why do we have all this spite in our world? What is this all about? Well, I'll tell you, it is about the wounded heart. And the worst thing for me is that, cynicism comes from the head, thinking in the head, and not engaging with the heart and not living in the now, I feel very strongly that that is one of the first layers. It's one of the first layers of defence. And I heard recently also a mother, a lovely mum, saying to one of her children, "Now, you've just shut your sister down." And I marvelled, because of course if we could in our kitchens teach our families how not to shut people down, how not to, if they're male, how not to hurt, and not to think of sexuality as some sort of juicy weapon, if we could teach our girls how to love again and be strong and bold and brave about people who would be indifferent towards that loving, then our world would be an easier place in which to live. I'm just going to pause there before we go on to our second part.